wow, decisions can be expensive, can't they?
Just stop making bad choices, Antonia.
Yeah, stop making
That's the
terrible
lesson for you.
choices.
All these bad choices you keep making.
Just don't make bad choices, right? Oh, I wish somebody
Easy.
had told me that earlier.
Done. Done.
Right. So when you've gone through enough of those cycles, you start going, before I make a major life choice, maybe I should think about this for a while.
Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So this week on the show, we're finally, after years of podcasting, going to get to the topic of procrastination.
Yeah.
After delaying it for an indefinite period of time. And just a quick comment, by the way. You're like laughing because I made a dad joke. Is that why?
It's such a dad joke.
I'm allowed. I'm a father.
You're allowed. You're 3 times over allowed to make terrible dad jokes.
So, and I know it dates me and ages me and makes me into that dad, but whatever.
Yeah.
Also, if you're listening, by the way, just a quick comment. If you're not watching this on YouTube, you will notice like birds chirping in the background, maybe even some random Pennsylvania countryside noises. Like sometimes gunshots go off in the background, like crazy stuff like that. So we're recording this in rural Pennsylvania right now at the time of this recording, and you'll hear that in the background. We're in nature on a back porch right now.
It's not just us adding ambient sounds.
We're in a natural studio this week.
We are.
Which is good. So let's talk about procrastination. So this idea of procrastination, I am sure you're listening or watching right now. If you're like me, you may struggle with getting things that you want to get done on a timeline that makes sense to you or works for you or whatever. I have a tendency to struggle with this a lot. I think a lot of people struggle with procrastination. And would you agree that, Antonia, that you also struggle with this and you also observe that many people struggle with this?
Well, we're going to culminate and build up to a premise that I think 100% of people procrastinate. So,
Ooh.
yes.
So if you're one of the people that said, that's not true, Antonia, I never procrastinate, we're coming for you next.
Yeah.
Beware.
I'm going to build a case.
All right. And I think I know your case you're going to build, so I agree with it. Let me just frame it real quick. I think sometimes we can think about procrastination on really basic things, like might have laundry to put away in my bedroom, and I'm like, I'll put that away, and then I'm like, oh, but I've got this, the kids need me, or I've got this phone call to make, or I got to finish this project, or I want to watch this show. I'll do that later tonight before I go to bed. I don't do it. A week goes by. Like, why haven't I put the freaking laundry away that I need to do? It's like a basic household. And I'm like, well, and I've started to just like wear them out of the pile. And then eventually they'll end up in the laundry basket. And I never put them away. Or I finally get to it and put them away under duress, or like I need to get this done because it's building up and becoming a problem. These are like low-level things that I think everybody has different relationships to. Some types have better relationships than others. I think, though, when I think about procrastination, that could be one of them. But I think in a little deeper terms of, well, all the way up to there might be life changes that I need to make, or you watching, listening need to make, like a career shift. I'm not going to stop the podcast. We're going to keep going personality hacker, but you might have a career shift in your life you've been delaying. We've noticed a lot with people in our personality life path programs or our profiler training. They have like a relationship they need to change, a career shift they need to change. They've known this for years and they just aren't taking action. So they're delaying this for some reason. That's like on the really, really high level, like big life changes. The laundry is like the low level, but there's this middle point, like project level. And I think this is where a lot of people find themselves. As an example from my life, I have a bunch of old videotapes from my childhood. I was born in the late 70s, so, VHS tapes from the 1980s from when I was a kid, photographs, analog photographs, audio recordings, like all this analog media that I would love to capture and have a digital representation of so I can share it with people and it's preserved for a longer time, so it doesn't wear out, I don't lose it, etc. These have been sitting in boxes. I even have some services that I've found that will help me do this. I even have all the equipment I've bought. Like I've got the VHS player and the audio player. I've got the thing that'll plug into my computer, but I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
3, 4, 5 years maybe now. This has been the quote project that I want to do. And I was like, well, I'll do that like next week when the things slow down or I have more time. And I hear like children like screaming in the background, like I hope it's fun. They sound like in distress, but I think they're probably getting chased around by their friends.
I'm not
or something.
hearing the screaming children.
Oh,
so
okay. I'm hearing
like
like one of those things. But I think that I often I have like this feeling that I'll have some magical extra time next week, not this week, but for some reason next week. Of course, there's going to be more than 24 hours in a day. and I'm going to have more than the amount of energy I have now. I'll double the energy, and there'll be like 28 hours in the day next week. And my schedule's going to be wide open, and my there's going to be no emergencies or anything that comes up next week. I mean, this week I've got to get through. This is what I tell myself every week.
Yep.
But then next week comes, and it's the same as this week. There are all the emergencies. I still only have 24 hours in a day, which I thought I was going to have 28. I don't know why it didn't change on me. And so then the frustration, and then I'm like, oh, I'll just deal with it later. And then I might even forget about it. But then when I see it, I'm distressed or I'm upset. Why didn't I handle that thing?
Yeah.
I think that's more the cycle that people have. I think they go through the experience of having a project or something they want to do in their life, and it's just not happening.
Yeah. Mine's energy. It's not that I think I'm going to have more time in the future. It's that I think I'm going to have more energy.
Yeah.
So I tend to kick cans because, well, I mean, I'm just too tired to do it right now. I've got all these other things. And so in the future is always like, I'm going to hit a flow state.
Yeah.
And then I'm just going to get everything done. And I'm always waiting for that flow state.
So, okay, we're going to dip into type just a little bit here. I know we want to go through some of the things we want to talk about, but I'll do a real quick compare and contrast because I can just imagine an ESTJ right now watching or listening going, well, Joel, you just take the thing that you're going to do in the future and you put it on a timeline. You just schedule on your calendar and then you do the thing when you scheduled it. I'm like, well, that's still delaying it. That's still procrastination. You just have a plan now, I guess. So, I mean, aren't we doing the same thing? You just have a formal way of doing it. I have an informal way of doing it, but we're still both not getting to the project this week.
Yeah. I think that is a really good segue for us to define procrastination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how are we defining it, Antonia? You're the king or queen of definitions.
I don't know if I'm a king or queen, but I definitely am fascinated by them and tend to, whenever we're about to record a podcast, do as much research as I can on the etymology of the word and what it all means and all that.
Between the two of us on this podcast, I'll say it again, you're the king or queen of definitions.
Of all of the people who are sitting right here at this table, I shall accept my monarchy.
Bestow it upon you.
I will
just take it and go.
I will be fair ruler in my hegemony of one.
Define fair.
So
let's do it.
Well, let's define procrastination first,
I know.
and then we'll get to fair, maybe in a future podcast. So you're not wrong, actually, that the person who is scheduling something into the future is also technically procrastinating, because the root of the word procrastination means pro, which is forward or toward, and the Latin word of crastinus, which I didn't know before, it means belonging to tomorrow. So when we are procrastinating, we are implicitly saying that this thing that I'm not doing today, I believe that it belongs to tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? And like it's tomorrow's responsibility. And so when a person now, of course, the modern day word of procrastination, or the way that we use it, like generally in language, the way it's evolved is that we're putting something off. But when you put something off and say it belongs to tomorrow on a calendar, I'm actually going to schedule it for a later time, you are still technically procrastinating, but you're doing it with mindfulness. Yeah, as opposed to mindlessly can kicking, which is what we do.
Yeah. Well, I think I have mindfulness around it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about it. I'm not completely unaware. So when we say mindfulness, we don't just mean awareness. We mean awareness with action steps, or awareness with some kind of something we're going to do about it.
Yeah, with context maybe. Because like you said, you and I, when we procrastinate into next week, we're doing it because we're hoping we're going to get like some sort of lottery win of time and energy. Like, I'm going to kick it into the future, and then maybe I'll have won the lottery, and then it'll be much easier to do it then, which is a thought. Maybe it's an unconscious thought, but it is a thought. But I wouldn't say it's mindful, because it's not taking into consideration, well, what already belongs to that day, what already belongs to tomorrow. And so the context of, putting it on a schedule and saying that I believe this goes tomorrow or a future date, and I'm going to place it there, and I'm going to understand the context of the schedule that's already crowding the time and energy. Yeah. And I'm going to set it with all of that in mind, versus I'm going to do it later. I'm going to do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I haven't taken an accounting for the context of what tomorrow means.
I just made a connection in my mind. Well, I mean, I kind of knew this, but I'm connecting to this concept. just like the pile of laundry, like a low-level task, just like the clothing that I have sitting on my dresser has a place to go.
Mm-hmm.
I know where it belongs. It doesn't belong on the top of my dresser folded. It belongs in the drawers or the closet it's supposed to be in. I think the connection I made is that time and days have things that belong to them on a timeline. Now, timelines are really hard for me. Personality type wiring, like it's not my thing, right? Timelines, it's just like, to me, time is this abstraction that I just kind of have to like be forced upon me all the time.
Yeah.
Drives me crazy. But in reality, when I step back and I tune to time, I'm like, oh, there's reality here. There's like the 24 hours in a day. I'm like, oh, next week I'll have 28. No, they're only going to be 24 next week too. No matter how much I believe in idealism, it's going to be different. But those things, that the pile of laundry doesn't just have a place in the drawers, it has a place in time of when it will be attended to, from what you just said. I think that's a mind-blowing concept for some people, that time also is like place. It's like only so much can go in there. When I think of time in the future, it's like I'll have more of it than I think I will. It's not as concrete. It's more of an abstraction. I think other personality types think in time, like more concrete terms around exactly how much time or energy they'll have in those days. So that's already, I think, some differentiation with personality types here, even as we get started into the conversation.
Well, I think it was kind of mind-blowing for me too, this idea that something belongs to tomorrow. I think I took it in the exact same spirit that you just described.
Like property of the future.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Or a sense of belonging. What does belong mean? Well, it's like,
yeah,
this is my cup. It belongs to me. This is my property. And
Yeah.
so I think that concept of property is exactly it. There's property in the future, and there's property of today. And if I take something that belongs, that I am responsible for today, and I put it into property of tomorrow, then I'm actually, like, it's almost a form of theft.
Yeah.
Right? It's a form of I mean, we already know that it can feel like irresponsibility, but when I'm doing it without understanding what already belongs to tomorrow,
Yeah.
right? I'm making tomorrow responsible for something that it was never supposed to be responsible for.
That idea of responsibility also makes me think of the word laziness.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I've had people tell me that I'm lazy because I procrastinate.
Mm-hmm.
And I've even probably been guilty of thinking about this about other people too. Like, well, you're not getting on that, so you must be lazy.
Yep.
Because you're not getting on that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we could probably also draw a distinction between laziness and procrastination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're not really the same thing.
I don't think they are. I think laziness is more about not wanting to put in necessary effort.
Like full effort,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
full engagement or something.
Yeah, it's like I have certain things that I'm responsible for, but I just don't want to put in the necessary effort to make them happen. I think procrastination is more about allocation or reallocation of effort. It's about when I'm going to put effort into something, not that I don't want to. Now, perpetual procrastination, never getting to something, might be how somebody expresses laziness. If they didn't really ever want to put the needed effort into and they just kept procrastinating, I mean, there's some crossover there for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think procrastination in and of itself is laziness. I think it's an uncertainty around when this task, this thing, to what moment in the timeline does it belong?
Yeah.
And so I think it's good to separate those out, particularly since I think people feel a lot of shame around procrastination. I think it makes them feel really bad as people,
I do.
They're doing something wrong, or they're like a bad person, or they're lazy.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's really easy to apply terrible characteristics to ourselves when we're doing something that is actually a necessary thing, which is figuring out where to place these where do I put the necessary energy in? And like I said, I mean, with that definition, obviously 100% of us procrastinate because 100% of us place something on a timeline later. So all of us do it technically. Now, in the modern vernacular, I don't know if all of us are can kicking, right?
Yeah.
And just wanting to never deal with the thing. But I think all of us are trying to figure out how to use our time and effort and energy as resources. But I think that 100% of people procrastinate in the way that we have come to think of it, like as in perpetual can kicking. It's just, what are we procrastinating?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think what I want to do right now is go through and ideate, or I have a short list here that I've jotted down of some of the things that contribute
Mm-hmm.
to procrastination, and I'll do it from a personal experience way, and then you can also offer some things maybe if I don't hit one of them. And if you're listening or watching along too, love to hear anything else you'd add into what you think contributes to your procrastination, because this isn't going to be a comprehensive list. I'm sure there's a lot of factors that go into this. So one of the things I think that for me, and I think a lot of people end up procrastinating because they are under what I've referred to as the tyranny of the urgent. It's a prioritization issue. I don't know what is the highest leverage thing to work on, or what is the greatest need, or what is the most important priority right now. I don't know, so I'm going to do whatever needs, like whatever's the loudest attention-grabbing thing in my life. So if I have a project I should attend to, but then I get this phone call and a friend needs a ride somewhere or something, it could go to the top of the priority list over the project because, well, this friend is in need. They need a ride to the airport, or they need help in some way. And so I think what I can often do is when another quote-unquote priority inserts itself into my life, I'm like, oh, well, I can't do that project now. It needs to go down in priority. And it gets kicked, and I don't necessarily schedule it somewhere. I just go, well, I'll deal with that later when the whatever, I wouldn't say emergency, but the urgent thing that came up. It could be an emergency, but it could just be something urgent. And so I think the tyranny of the urgent definitely causes us to delay things. And if we don't have a schedule on, or we don't have a process to schedule it or pick it back up, sometimes it doesn't get attended to again in a proper time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think prioritization, is that something you've identified in your life around prioritization?
For sure. And what was coming up for me when you were talking about the tyranny of the urgent and this concept of prioritization is that graph, that quadrant of urgent and important.
Yeah.
Right? I can't remember what the technical name of that graph is, but it's like in one quadrant, it's things that are important and urgent, and then another is important but not urgent. Another one is not important but urgent, and then not important, not urgent.
Yeah.
And anything that not important, not urgent, like very rarely, I mean, that doesn't matter, right? Who cares if that gets done? But we tend to apply more time to the urgent, not important than the important, not urgent. And yet that quadrant is the leverage point. It's like that important, not urgent stuff is that's where we should be applying a lot of our attention.
Yeah. Well, it's usually important to somebody else, and it's only urgent to us. And so that's often why we do that. We prioritize the urgent, but it's important to something like outside of us. It's not important to us necessarily personally. I think that's why we often do that from my perspective.
I think that's probably true, actually, is that we're trying to honor somebody else. It's not important to us, or just it's incidental. It just has come up. And so, and in the case where we're spending a lot of our time on things that are urgent but not important, I think that we're allowing the external world to determine what's important to us. Like we're outsourcing our priorities because we're just letting incidentals, just whatever has come up with the sense of urgency, that gets to determine what's important to us.
Yeah.
And I think it's it's not being mindful of what is actually important to us as people. Now I will make one caveat on that. We were talking to somebody recently in a call after one of our podcast premieres that said, I have INFP preferences and I have 2 little kids. I think one was like 1 and one was 3. And it was just, how do I handle all of this? And I think in that situation, the tyranny of the urgent is a way of life.
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't think that was not mindfully chosen, because the choice was to have children. And at the point where a person makes the choice to have children, they're making the choice to be in a season of a lot of urgency. And it's almost always important too, right? It's like, you're not just going to watch your 3-year-old run around with the diaper of your 1-year-old and go, I think it'll probably be fine. I'll do that later. Like you're like,
I'll clean up the mess later.
Right. Like, is it full? Go grab the diaper. Right. And like but it was still done with mindfulness because it was a choice to have children. And so I think sometimes we hand ourselves over to seasons and time periods of the tyranny of the urgent. And I don't think that's outsourcing values. The person determined the value was to have children. And so they are still honoring their values, right? And the things that are important to them. It's just it's like a season. And I think we go through that in like careers too. Yeah. Where like there's a all hands on deck, maybe 2 or 3 weeks where we're all doing this massive project, and it's the tyranny of the urgent for that time period. So I don't think time periods and seasons of that necessarily mean that we're outsourcing our values. But I think if we can't get out of it, if we can't get out of that, sort of we get stuck in that constant perpetual, it's just like a way of life. We're gripped by it. I think at that point we are outsourcing our priorities and the things that are important to us.
By the way, if you're listening along going, I don't relate to any of this. I never procrastinate. I do everything in the right timeline. You guys are not resonating with me. Hang on, because I think we're still coming for you. We're coming for you. And I think we're going to say some things you're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I do delay that. I do procrastinate that. I think that is something that definitely happens in my life. Okay. The other thing, too, that I identified I described it earlier. This week, I've got a lot of going on, and I have an idealism. I mean, I know it's not true, but I really, like, the feeling part of me or the idealistic part of me, I really believe I'll have more hours in the day next week, or that I can somehow schedule 2 meetings against each other without any travel time between them. I mean, I did that this week, too, quite frankly. But, like, I have this idealism of, it'll only take 20 minutes to get there. Oh, I can do that one meeting and only have 5 minutes to prepare for the other one. I'll just wing it when I get there. Or like the idealism of what will be available to me in time, resource, attention is almost unmanageable in my life. Now, again, you listening or watching might have a different relationship to this. I have a tendency to be more idealistic because of my personality and how I'm wired. You may not be as much that wired, or that way wired. But I would say that idealism is a contributor in whatever way it would be, even for people that it's not project related, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. I'm always perfect. I get everything done. Well, you're delaying something, and I bet the thing you're delaying has some idealism attached to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Whatever it is you're delaying or you're procrastinating.
Well, I can add my form of idealism is how how perfect it has to be.
That's it. Perfectionism.
Yeah, I'm not really a perfectionist most of the time, but there are certain things where I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this, though, it has to look a certain way, or it has to be or it has to reach a certain threshold.
Certainly.
Right, and what was the phrase? Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Like, it's like sometimes you just have to get it done, and there's like, I don't have idealism around how many hours of a day. I don't have idealism around, I never think that this is a good idea to punt something into the future time-wise. I just hope it will be good energy-wise. I just hope that my energy will be better at that point. And sometimes it's true. That's the unfortunate thing. Every once in a while it comes through for me, and I'm like, oh, I just learned a terrible lesson about life, didn't I? And I think for me, it's how high quality something has to be. I get idealism around that, and if it can't be that, well, then I'll put it off until I have the capacity to make it as good as I want it to be.
Yes, that's also, I think, a lot of people's idealism.
Yeah,
is like that. I want it to be competent. I want it to be really excellent. Excellence will require me to slow down and just delay doing this till I can do it right.
Yes.
Well, I think our friend Dan talks about, he's like, he made this, or was it Jonathan? It was Dan or Jonathan, I don't remember, had this phrase. I always like try to credit people, but I forget who said it. Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly.
I just said it.
Oh, you just
now.
said that just now?
No, it's not my quote. I was quoting whoever you're
quoting.
quoting.
You just did quote that.
But
I'm sorry, my brain was wandering onto the next thing.
Yeah.
If you just said that, my apologies.
I did, but it's okay because it was somebody brilliant like Jonathan or Dan.
I think it was Dan.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But anyway, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly, meaning like it doesn't have to be perfect to take action. So I think idealism contributes. I think the other contribution is permission/responsibility. I think the idea of, like, in my life, I actually will procrastinate things that I want to do that would juice me up, that would be creative. But I look at myself and I'm like, oh, Joel, you have a responsibility to your family, to your children, to your wife, to your business, to your parents, to your extended family, to your society, to your community. Like, all these responsibilities are on my list. And I'm like, how could I do the thing that will juice me up? Or I actually will delay certain things because I don't give myself permission to do them, because of the responsibility I feel. So I think this can also be a factor in, you might be listening or watching right now. You're like, I get everything done. I never procrastinate a project. Well, are you procrastinating hanging out with your family because you don't feel you have permission to stop working to hang out with them? Or are you delaying doing, getting a therapist and working on your emotions because you're like, well, I don't have time right now. I'm trying to make money and build a career, or this new relationship is an issue, or whatever. There's a bunch of things maybe that you're not doing because you don't give yourself permission to slow down and attune to them.
Or are you putting off getting rest?
Yeah.
There's like human needs, including rest and relaxation and not having a million things on one's mind.
Yes.
Like we have a mental health crisis globally, I'm sure, but definitely in the country we live in, for a reason. And a part of the reason why is because there are certain basic needs that we don't know are going perpetually unmet. And not looking at backlit screens is one of them. Are you procrastinating or putting off like quiet time with yourself, silence, introspection, rest, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think we're all doing it.
And then I would also say that, and I think introverted judgers, like IJs, are going to really resonate with this idea. But other types too. I think it's an energy issue for a lot of people. Like, will I have the energy to do this? I need to delay it because I need to wait until I have, and you mentioned this too, Antonia, like I need to wait until the energy comes for this. If I start this and I don't have the energy for it, I'm going to fail. I might not be able to complete it. So let me wait, and I'll just wait until I feel like I've got enough energy to attune to it. And then I talked to some INTJ maybe who's like 7 years later, like, I'm going to get my life together in the way I want it before I go and make friends. And I'm like, really? You're still waiting to get your quote unquote life together, whatever? And it's this idea of like, I just need the energy to get it all together, have it all in place. And then I can go do the thing that I need to go do, like make friends or reach out or grow or whatever, fill in the blank.
Yeah, that's seasoned with a little idealism too, huh?
Sure. I mean, there's a bunch of, I think all these factors play together. They weave together in the soup that creates procrastination. I'm sure there's a lot more than what we identified here, but I think these are some starting points to see in your life as you're listening along or watching to go, okay, I see that kind of at play in my procrastinations.
Yep, I think that's absolutely true. And I do think that all of those that we mentioned, idealism, permission, prioritization, the tyranny of the urgent, and this idea of energy allocation, I think that they all look a little different depending on personality type, because we're going to see priorities differently, depending upon how we're pre-wired to prioritize. And we're going to see energy management a little bit differently depending upon our type. We're going to see things like, what we're idealistic about. Because like I said, I'm not normally a perfectionist, but every once in a while it comes out. Why? Right? Like, why in that moment? Why did I all of a sudden decide I can't invite people over for dinner unless I've got this incredible 1950s, 1960s 5-course meal, all prepped and set and like all that. And I'm like, that's stupid. Why would I think that? But for some reason, my brain goes, you can't do that until you get it right. And so I've had to teach myself to go, people are okay if they just come over, right, and hang out and you order pizza. It's going to be fine. But for some reason, I have this this idealism around it, and this I can't do it unless it's right. So I think our personality type really helps us figure out where we're doing this, not if we're doing it, but where we're doing it, and the aspects of life that we got to get some of control around some of these things. I know, at least for me, it becomes clearer when I see that.
So we may not be able to go into like specific types in this episode. Maybe we could do one in the future. I don't know, but we could probably talk about a framework. To look at this through.
Well, I was going to say one more thing. And I can use this as a segue into a framework. One more thing that I would add to the list of contributors is a feeling of uncertainty. I think we tend to procrastinate and put off anything we feel uncertain around. And that's part of the idealism, and that's part of the permission, and that's part of the prioritization. How good does it need to be? Am I supposed to be doing this first? Like, can I do this later? Am I allowed to do this with all my other responsibilities? Like it's just this big question of uncertainty. You talked about we can procrastinate small things. When I'm procrastinating putting my folded laundry away, it's not because I'm experiencing deep uncertainty. I'm just not prioritizing it, right? I'm like, oh, it's going to be fine, right? And like you said, sometimes there can just be two piles. There can be the pile I'm getting things out of, and then there's the pile I'm putting things in. And I'm like, oh, well, they're just two piles. And why does the dresser have to be part of this interaction? Like, isn't it mostly just decorative anyway? Isn't it just to shove clothes into?
It's more efficient this way.
Anybody who like walks into my room, right? So, so it's like there's this. I'm not experiencing uncertainty there. But you also mentioned we can procrastinate or kick cans down the road around major life decisions. And my goodness, uncertainty certainly comes in there. Because it's like, well, you get to be my age and you realize that time is actually very short, and decisions I make now are going to impact me for a while because, I made decisions in the past. They weren't the right choices, and I not only poured time and energy into living out the poor choices, but then I had to pour time and energy into cleanup of the poor choices, and then I had to pour time and energy into recalibrating my poor choices. So it was like, wow, decisions can be expensive, can't they?
Just stop making bad choices, Antonia.
Yeah, stop making
That's the
terrible
lesson
choices.
for you. All these bad choices you keep making.
Just don't make bad choices, right? Oh, I wish somebody
Easy.
had told me that earlier.
Done. Done.
Right. So when you've gone through enough of those cycles, you start going, before I make a major life choice, maybe I should think about this for a while. And I sometimes, quote unquote, procrastinating, which is this choice belongs to tomorrow, right? Making this decision belongs to tomorrow. Sometimes that's accurate, right? Because I don't have enough information. I'm missing a piece of information. I'm missing something that would help me make a better choice. And sometimes I feel that way and I'm dead wrong. Actually, this decision belonged to today. And the fact that I didn't make the decision today, I put it off till tomorrow, meant that I no longer get to decide about that at all because it was an opportunity. Yeah. And now it's over, right? There's a phrase that you picked up someplace. You can credit where you picked it up. You and I have been saying it.
Eben Pagan.
Oh, okay, it was Eben.
Quoted it from somebody else that I don't remember if he had a reference for it or not, but he's one of our mentors.
Yeah. So Eben, quoting somebody mysteriously, said, "Successful people are they're smart enough to know when they're lucky."
Yep.
Right. And that's one thing I've not been. I've not been smart enough to know when I'm lucky. Like sometimes I apply it to things that are not about the moment. And so my tendency to procrastinate has, as decisions that belonged to today didn't belong to tomorrow, but me kicking them over thinking, I need more information, has made it so that I was not aware of how lucky I was to even be able to decide on it that day. And so now it's a matter of me getting a lot clearer on why I feel certain about things and uncertain about other things, and whether or not that sense of uncertainty is automatically a red flag. Because I think that uncertainty is such a disconcerting feeling, and it's built inside of us as a check and balance system. We need to feel uncertainty about about some things. And it's such a disconcerting feeling. I think that no matter what the context is, we always assume it's a red flag and something's wrong. If I feel uncertain, it means there's buyer beware. There's a problem here. And I don't think that's true. I think sometimes we feel uncertainty around things that we just don't have enough experience with them. And I think it's also tied to personality type. So once I started understanding the things I naturally feel certain around, and so if I feel uncertain in that arena, that is a red flag. I should pause. And things that I feel uncertain about no matter what, and so I just need to eat that I'm always going to feel uncertain around that. And things that I always feel certain around, and I probably shouldn't. Not just, and when I feel uncertain, that's a red flag. Maybe it's a red flag that I always feel certain around it. Does it make sense? And so that has really helped me understand my relationship to really resources of all kind, money, time, energy, but in this case, time and energy in terms of procrastination.
Well, and one of the things we've been really working with a lot of our students, our clients in our programs, like our Personal Life Path, is separating the idea of uncertainty from the idea of proficiency, competence, capacity, right? So I might have a part of myself that actually I have to use for my career, that I have to exercise all the time. I built capacity. I have proficiency, I've got competence. I can actually operate from that place very well. But even though I have all those things, I still don't feel certain about it. I still have an uncertainty inside of me. And this can cause all sorts of challenges for people, right? This can cause us to behave in all sorts of ways. But if we can separate those two things and realize, my certainty and my competence isn't the same, I think that unlocks a lot for us. And that also, as a side note, we can see people that haven't made peace with their uncertainty. They follow politicians or leadership or ideas or social groups or whatever that say, hey, I've got the certainty over here. Okay, I'll just hand myself over to you then in this area. And I think that if you can make peace with uncertainty, you won't do that as much as well, which is really powerful.
Such a good point. Yeah. Why do people just sort of seem to follow, gas bags?
Because these gas bags seem certain. They give us a sense, oh, they must know they're so definitive about this. They feel like they're speaking not truth or whatever, but they feel so certain of themselves.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow that guy.
Yeah, it's like a desire to borrow their certainty.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think making peace with uncertainty is really, really, really crucial. And knowing those things for yourself, I think, is also super helpful. So, like you mentioned, we can't go through every single personality type, but if you know your personality type, and particularly if you know your car model, I think what we're about to share will be helpful to you. Yeah. And then you're going to have to at least this week, at least in this podcast, you're going to have to do the math a bit to figure out how it fits in your life.
So time out. I'll just, for somebody, maybe you're a brand new listener or you're just a little unfamiliar with what we're talking about, the car model, the 4-letter code in the Myers-Briggs system. So like my personality type is ENFP. I have ENFP preferences. Those 4 letters tell me, it's like a decoder ring. It tells me the cognitive functions, technical name, but it's basically the processes in my mind that are learning information and making decisions. And once I know how I learn information or make decisions, now I have a lot of ability to grow, to understand myself, how I'm relating to others. And once I know other people's, that starts to unlock a lot of things. So we use a basic metaphor. We call it the car model. It's just, if you imagined your mind as a 4-passenger car, you have a driver, sitting next to the driver up front in the front seat is a co-pilot. Directly below the co-pilot is a 10-year-old child-like part of you. And then directly behind the driver is a 3-year-old child part of you. Again, these are just metaphors. This isn't exactly one-to-one. It's just a way to understand it. And these mental processes that we use, our learning and our decision-making, fit into this car. So we can kind of understand its maturity levels and certainty levels and all the different things that it plays out. So when we say the car model, you can find out more information over our website, personalityhacker.com. Just search the car model on there. And we have some articles, and obviously we've recorded podcasts about it in the past.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to go into the car model to give at least what I suspect is going on here with procrastination. And as I hinted, this idea of certainty and uncertainty. So through coaching for the last decade plus, that sort of awareness started to become very, very, very clear to me. And we've done a whole podcast on this topic too, personality types and certainty. Totally recommend going and listening to that one because it'll give you a lot more. Well, it's a 1-hour conversation on it, and so we've laid it out. But I started to understand that people's relationship to their functions that are not preferred, like their lower functions, in this case, in the car model, the 10-year-old and the 3-year-old, I used to say sophistication. Right. And I do think that there is a little bit of that. There is a bit of it around sophistication. That's not necessarily capacity, by the way. And it's not also necessarily skill development. Because I've known some people who have really poured a lot of time and effort, or like you said, been in jobs or careers that required them to get good at things that would not normally be their preference. So I couldn't really say it was skill, and I couldn't really say it was talent or sophistication, because sometimes it's fairly sophisticated. But one thing that never altered, it didn't matter who I was talking to.
Even interest sometimes. Mm-hmm. Like we sometimes have an aspiration for a more like a smaller part of us.
Absolutely. That's very common, very common. One thing, though, that we never let go of is that the further down our function is, a cognitive function is, like the driver, co-pilot, 10-year-old, 3-year-old, the further it is towards the 3-year-old, the more it experiences deep uncertainty. And that's actually what is the challenge of that function for us. That part of us that makes us feel this red flag, quote unquote, style uncertainty is one of the reasons why we tend to push it away and why we procrastinate anything that has to do with it. Because we're just uncertain. We just don't know what to do there.
A really great quick example of this, let's say we have an ENFJ personality type who is a PhD doctor in a certain area, has studied, has degrees and credentials on the wall behind their desk, and clearly their 3-year-old is introverted thinking accuracy. Clearly they've done study and they know their material, they know their subject, they've done it so much they have degrees behind them.
Dripping in qualifications.
The capacity is there, the proficiency is there, the competence is there, the knowledge is there. They might even teach this for a living. They might do this for a living. And yet that ENFJ might still struggle, even with all of that behind them, with the certainty. Like, am I really dialed in enough? Do I have enough credentials? Maybe I should get a second PhD. I don't know. Like maybe I should study more. Maybe I need more like external markers to say that I've done the thing. And again, that's just one example. It's not for all ENFJs. Some have different relationships to this, but that's an example of how this might show up in the wild.
Well, I think the way it's going to show up for somebody in that situation is, am I allowed to form my own conclusions?
There you go.
Yeah, it's not just do I know a lot, because knowing a lot can be in a lot of different functions. It's specifically, am I allowed to do my own thinking around this topic?
Without checking in.
That's right. Can I form my own conclusions that maybe break off from the rest of my, so that's the institution I'm a part of, or the field I'm a part of? Am I allowed to basically think for myself on this one, even if everybody else disagrees with me?
Yeah.
So it's and not to say that they can't do that thinking, but just the question itself can create deep uncertainty.
Yeah.
Can I defend it?
Absolutely.
If I were to present this to people in my field, and would I be able to defend it if everybody else said I was crazy? Right?
Yeah.
And so the thing we tend to procrastinate is the thing that gives us that feeling of uncertainty. So the way that I have used this, at least for myself, in helping to deal with procrastination, because of course our personality type, Carl Jung said our personality type was a problem, and Isabel Briggs-Myers said our personality type, we should have type patriotism and it should be celebrated. So who's right? I think they're both right. I think on one hand, our type can be undermining to us, and I think on another level, our type can support us. And it's just how we're using it. Are we letting it undermine us and be a problem, or are we allowing it to be something that supports us and helps us get to the next level? So this is how I have come to see it. So our driver function, that first function, that dominant, it is a place of, I would argue, too much certainty. It's overconfidence. And because of that, we don't hesitate when there are tasks that are in the realm of that first function. We just go for them. Now, you mentioned permission is an issue, and sometimes there are things, I'm sure, that you want to do with that first function that you have decided you're not going to because you have other things you also have to attend to. I kind of figured that was what you were referring to.
Absolutely.
Stuff you want to do.
Yeah. No, there are things I definitely want to do. Yeah, it is a permission issue for me.
And so sometimes we can lack permission to go do all the things we want to do in our first function. But if there's nothing really pulling at our tail, we'll go do those things. In fact, it's a pleasure, right? Oh, I've got this thing I got to go do. Oh, it's in my driver. Too bad, right? Here I go. Yay. And oftentimes that's where we access a flow state.
Yeah, and I would say probably if you do throttle your driver, it is idealism that causes that. I think that's what it is for me. It's like, well, I guess I could do that a half job in my driver process, but I'm going to delay that because I really want to put all the creativity. I want a perfect, idealistic, I want all the whiteboards around. I want to be able to do the brainstorming session for like 3 weeks straight. I don't want just an afternoon of that. So unless I can have all 3 weeks, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do an afternoon.
Yeah, but anything.
Set this big framework up for it.
But that's all a nice to have, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The need to haves.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If it's like, no, it needs your first function to go problem solve. You're like, okay, great. Finally something that is designed for me, right?
Yeah.
So that first function, we tend to not procrastinate there unless, like you mentioned, there's things like idealism and it's a nice to have, or we feel a sense of responsibility and we put off the nice to haves. But it's almost always, if there's something that needs to be done, is not a nice to have, but absolutely has to be done, and our first function is the right tool for the job, it's done. It's already done. We already did it, right? It's off the list. Our second function is that co-pilot is a place of not nearly as much. It's not overconfident, but it is a place of certainty. And usually it's a little bit more modest. So I find that when something needs my co-pilot function, I usually handle it unless I think there's a skill I need to develop first. The only time I procrastinate anything in that is like, oh, I need to go figure out that skill and then I can go do the thing. So there's a sense of modesty there, right? Maybe I don't know how to do all the things in that function. Maybe I need to go learn it first. And this is also a part of us that really steps up to the plate when other people need us. When somebody else needs us in this function, we're golden. We don't procrastinate that at all because we feel that sense of responsibility.
But for the self, all bets might be off.
Yes. Yes, we might procrastinate it when it comes to ourselves, work that we need to do in that function. That tends to be something that we will put off. But if anybody else needs it, we're there. We are showing up. Our 10-year-old function is the first time we start to feel uncertainty. But it's a function that we don't want to be bad at. It bothers us. And we don't like that we're uncertain whether or not we're good at it. And so what we tend to have, the energy we have there, is an overcompensating nature. And we will procrastinate anything that falls in the realm, the reality of that function, if nobody is holding us responsible or accountable to it. If somebody's holding us accountable, we'll do gymnastics to show up for them because we don't want the world to reflect that we're bad at this thing. We want it to say we're good at it, and we want to get a head pat from it.
Yeah.
But if there's heat on us, if there's nobody who's like breathing down our neck around it, or we don't think that it will undermine our reputation in any way, we will kick those cans into the future like crazy.
I think the 10-year-old function is the tertiary, technically called. I think that's the most likely part of us that gets hijacked by the tyranny of the urgent.
Mm-hmm.
I think it gets hijacked by the external things that I guess I got to go do this. Like it's very hijackable, probably way more than the first two.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is really where that shows up the most.
Especially if it's an extroverted function. It is it's already tuned into the outside world. But I think that it can be very hijackable by even if it's an introverted function. I think that's also the case. It just probably doesn't feel as fast, but it still can be, like this sense of responsibility or expectation, this sense of like, oh, I have to do this. It's more of an inner, sense, but and it might seem less reactionary, but that doesn't mean it's any less under that tyranny. Yeah, I agree. And then finally, the 3-year-old function. This is a place of deep uncertainty. Just like you were talking about the person with ENFJ preferences might have done a ton of work to overcome what they think is the challenge of that function. And yet, anytime they are asked to go against the grain, even if they're maybe a world expert on a topic, but they're asked to fight for their right to have a differing opinion from literally everybody else in their field, even if they're right, they're going to feel deep uncertainty. And that deep uncertainty is almost always the cause of our massive procrastination.
Well, and this can be really challenging if there's any life choices in this part of us, right? If there's something that, like, for example, you and me, our 3-year-old, the function, the cognitive function that fits there for both of us is introverted sensing or memory as 2 ENPs in the Myers-Briggs system. And so, life demands of us that we have routine and schedule and stability, but we fight against this constantly. And so we delay setting up the schedule or getting on the routine or whatever. It's like, we'll do that later because we don't value it as important. And yet, with children, with a career, with all the things we have to do, life demands that of us anyway.
And that's a nice way of saying it. We actually had a major life decision that required this of us. And what's the song in SpongeBob? We were
SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah, we flopped like a fish.
Oh,
right. Like
the lyrics to the song. Yes,
the lyrics. Right. Yeah. Get on the deck and flop like a fish. It was like that's kind of the experience we had. We had to find a new living situation, and it's do we stay put? Do we move someplace else? Do we rent? Do we buy a house? Like there was all these laying down roots questions. And it was almost overwhelming for us. We're like, I don't know. Do we stay here? Do we just go into perpetual travel mode? And then maybe life will, hand us something? Who knows? And what we realized, because we ultimately did make a decision to purchase a house. We made a decision to purchase a house in the town that we were already living in. Even saying it sometimes gives me like a little bit of like, I hope it was the right decision, right? Like even now I'm like, the house is bought. It is a thing that's happening. Like there's no going back. And I'm like, okay, I hope it's okay. Like there's just this uncertainty, even though when you and I do the math, when we write it all out, we're like, no, that is absolutely the decision we need to be making for our family at this time, right? We need to ground ourselves. It's a place that we have tethers to. We have a dentist. We know where our gym is. Like there's all these things that make our lives much easier. Our son now has a job locally. He needs to get to his. It was just like a no-brainer, except for when I'm just in that function. I'm like, okay, we bought a house. It's gonna be fine.
Deep uncertainty. Mm-hmm. Even though the math checks out, we can look at the paper, the sheet, and all the decisions. Yes, this lines up. We're still like, is this still the right choice? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Even now, you're still like, it makes me like, is this the right choice? I think that's what we're speaking to. This sense of uncertainty, even if we're like confirmed it's the right choice. right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, even I think if we hadn't had external pressure in our life to make a choice, I think I would still be flip-flopping about it.
Probably.
Yeah, for sure. So it was like, thank goodness I had external sources that are like, make a decision. I'm like, okay.
And some help from family members and friends that can help do more of these things that are better than us.
And thank goodness. Oh my goodness. Like, I can't even be more grateful. And that's why I think all of us, 100% of us, are procrastinating something, right? In the thoughtful, mindful way where we're determining what tasks belong to tomorrow, but also in I don't feel like this thing belongs to any tomorrows, and it definitely doesn't belong to today. So if you look at your car model, if you look at your cognitive functions and really get a good idea of what that 3-year-old inferior function is, you might see a whole storehouse of things that are currently being procrastinated in that function specifically. Even like you were mentioning before, there might be an ETJ that's like, I don't procrastinate anything. It's like, well, for ETJs, the inferior function, that 3-year-old function, is introverted feeling or authenticity. It's a evaluation of values. It's introspection. It's emotional processing, right?
Checking in with your own motivations of why you do what you do.
Right. Making decisions that are heartfelt, making choices that are based on perpetually updating your value system
and identity.
Are you scheduling in that work? Right? Is there like a time? And a person could, they could say, yes, I go to my therapist. That's better than nothing for sure. And there's also work that needs to be done on one's own. And are you making space for that? And I'm not saying that there's ETJs that aren't doing that. I'm just saying there's a lot that are not.
Yeah.
And they might go, I don't procrastinate anything. So we are all procrastinating something, and it's usually found in that part of us that feels deeply uncertain.
I think we should pause here. I would like to do a part 2 at least, maybe part 3. I don't know how long it's going to take to unpack this, but in the next episode, maybe we could just go through, maybe we can't go every single possible way that every single type procrastinates, but we could just kind of get a general broad brush sense of this to kick off more conversation around it, because I think that's the point. Is these are conversational connection starters for you watching or listening. We want this to start making connections in your mind, and we get this catalyst for you to make more connections to how this applies to what you can do from your personality type.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. Before we wrap this one up, I do want to say that I think understanding this dynamic with our car model also helps give us a way out.
Yeah.
Right? So just as an overview, again, you, the listener, you'll have to do the math in your own life and your own circumstances and your own type and functions. But I think the high leverage things for me is, first, have I created a life that's ergonomic to my first 2 functions, my driver and my co-pilot? Meaning that if these are the functions that I'm always going to feel like I have a lot of time and energy for, and they give me energy also by staying in them, have I created a lifestyle for myself that makes sure that I get regular hits of the energy of doing tasks that belong to those functions?
Yeah.
Right? Like, keep the flywheel of the energy spinning. So have I created an ergonomic lifestyle for myself? And then on top of that, do I leverage the fact that my co-pilot and 10-year-old tend to be in service to other people? Just like the co-pilot is in service to the driver, right? It has a service mentality. It has a responsible to others and show up for others and be, in some models, they call it the parent archetype. Mm-hmm. Does it show up with a parent energy, right? Or it does. So if I'm procrastinating something, can I somehow tie it to that parent energy? Can I somehow tie it to a sense of responsibility to somebody else and leverage it for myself in that way? Like, I'm never going to do it for myself, but I'll probably do it for somebody else. And so can I tie it to that function in some way?
Yeah.
And then can I throw my hat over the fence, so to speak? That's also another Eben Pagan quote. To throw one's hat over the fence is to compel oneself to do something by making it so that you have taken a loss if you don't do it. If you throw your hat over the fence because you're trying to cross that fence, it means if you don't get over the fence, you don't get your hat. And I think our 10-year-old function, that tertiary function, that tends to be our throw our hat over the fence function. So is there any way that I can leverage that part of myself to create a circumstance where if I don't get this done, that part of me takes a loss.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in reputation or something to that effect.
So you just gave me permission, Antonia, to schedule us super tight into the future using my 10-year-old process of extroverted thinking or effectiveness. Thank you for that. I have it captured on air with proof. This is fantastic.
I don't need to give you permission to do that. You already do that.
Basically, I do that. I schedule things like, well, it's on the schedule. We have to fulfill it now. And I tend to overdo it, right? I tend to overschedule and just jam as much as I can. And so we can throw our hat over the fence, and I would just be mindful of the idealism that comes in when that happens.
Don't overdo it.
Because again, it can be hijackable.
For sure.
This 10-year-old.
Yep.
So just be mindful of that.
Yes.
In your own life as you're listening or watching.
Well, and if you're already a person who is in the tyranny of the urgent, you're probably doing this too much.
Yeah.
Right? You're probably handing this part of yourself over too much. So it's a balance, right? It's like, but if I'm not getting something done, can I tie it to that part of who I am? Not, can I just always be acting from that part of who I am? Obviously that's a disaster.
Yeah.
But it's like, I can't seem to get this done. Well, for me, I have extroverted feeling or harmony as my 10-year-old or tertiary. Sometimes if I can't get something done, I just make a formal public promise that I'll do it, right? And now all of a sudden I have to because otherwise I take a reputation hit, right? And especially if I can do it in service of other people, right? If it's tied to an outcome that feels like, oh, I'll increase relationship with them, warm and fuzzy, right? So I think there is a way to leverage that. And then finally, the 3-year-old function. This part of ourselves is what's technically called the inferior. The insight for me was that if I'm waiting to feel certain about decisions that live in the realm or reality of this function, like things like laying down roots and buying houses, if I'm waiting for a sense of certainty to pull the trigger, I'm going to be waiting for eternity. Just because I feel uncertain around these things does not mean it's a red flag, right? It's that this function always feels that way. It's not about waiting for myself to feel certain. It's about making peace with uncertainty, knowing it's always going to go, oh, well, hope it works out. Fingers crossed. And almost always it's fine. But if I have a major decision to make, I have to go into the murky, uncertain ground, this feeling that doesn't feel so good. I have to make peace with that. Otherwise, there's a whole area of my life that I'm always ignoring and neglecting. And so I can both create an ergonomic life for myself that honors my first 2 functions, my driver and co-pilot, and my third, right? While at the same time requiring myself to get out of my comfort zone to regularly visit a deeply uncertain place. And if I don't do that, I'm not a complete person. If I only create a lifestyle that's ergonomic to my first 2 functions, my driver, my co-pilot, I'm actually missing parts of myself, really crucial, important parts.
Yeah.
And I'm probably kicking cans that are now almost rancid, right? Things that if I do not address are at some point going to cost me myself.
Yeah.
And so the leverage point for me is not waiting for certainty. It's knowing that uncertainty is part of the process.
Yes. Okay. So let's put a pin in this. Let's pause. Let's procrastinate following up with this conversation and applying it to each personality type until next episode.
Yes.
See how I wove that in there? You like that? What do you think? So part of what these podcasts are designed to do is to kick off a discussion. And a discussion doesn't have to happen in real time, although we provide for those too, for discussions in real time with you in person and asking questions. But you are listening along or watching along, and you haven't had a microphone, but you can come and express your perspective. Some of the things that contribute to your procrastination in your life, some of the things that you do procrastinate around. I'd love to hear about these. We would love to hear about them and read about them. You can leave us a comment. You can ask a question or share a story about procrastination in your life directly under this podcast, either on YouTube or on our website under this episode. So come over to personalityhacker.com, and we want your voice to be heard here. We want to have you part of this conversation or discussion. So if you come over and you can leave that comment over on our website, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I do want to make a little note. I don't know if the very next episode is going to be the one that delineates or lines up all the different types in the relationship to procrastination, but we will do it at some point in the future. So we'll make it we'll have it belong to tomorrow at some unknown time in the future.
Go. We might really procrastinate.
That's right.
It might even be a part 2. It might just be like
That's right.
like revisited
Yeah.
into the future.
That's right.
Like a reboot of Star Wars or something.
Or something. We'll figure it out, but it might belong to tomorrow's tomorrow too. We'll see. We'll see what happens. That said, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot, and I read every one. We're on YouTube. You might even be watching us now. And if you enjoyed this episode, you can like it. You can also subscribe and hit the bell that lets you know when a new episode comes out. And we have a premiere for our episodes at this time period in history, usually on Sunday morning. So check us out when it premieres. We also have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on iTunes, it also helps us out a lot. And we highly recommend that you go pick up a copy of your personality type owner's manual. The concepts that we're talking about, right? These ideas of really understanding your car model in depth and how it relates to you as a person and how you can make type come alive for yourself. The theory of it is interesting, right? A lot of us have been bit by a bug and we just find it fascinating. But until you really start to put it in your life, so you start living it, you won't have tapped into its real gold, its real genius, and you'll only have a theoretical understanding. We highly recommend you have a lived understanding. Yeah. So head over to personalityhacker.com and look for the owner's manual of your personality type and start living your personality type. Yeah, when you begin to take action, there's an alchemy of action that happens from the theory into your own lived experience that we want to encourage you for. Thank you for listening along this week. My name is Joel Mark Witt. And I'm Antonia Dodge. And we'll talk to you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.